Good morning. And another announcement that Michelle didn't get to is that she's preaching next week. So I'm very excited about that. So we get to hear from her. The running line is not as much as I would like. I wish she. I love it when she preaches, and so I'm excited to have her back up on the pulpit next week. Today is a Go Sunday, so we're talking about missions. That's the main theme of today's service, so thank you for being here. I will say that so far, and I mean this totally sincerely, my favorite thing so far this morning is hearing your baby cry. I just love having a baby in church. It's so wonderful, so don't take her out, please. We're going to meet her in just a moment. Missions is at the heart of central to Christ's heart. Matthew 28:18, Jesus has risen, he's died and he's risen, he's back and he's talking to his disciples and he says, all authority has been given to me. All authority has been given to me. And what does he say? He sends his disciples into the world to make disciples. What does he do with all that authority? He sends us out to share the gospel around the world. He launches his missions program. Missions is central to the Christian life. If we aren't going, we're sending. Acts 1:7-9, the same thing. Jesus is about to leave. He has died, he's resurrected, he's spent some time passing on some last things and clearing some things up finally for his disciples, and they're kind of like, oh, now I get it. And he says, I'm leaving, but I'm sending you my Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit is sent to you to empower you, to give you the strength and the will and the wisdom to carry this mission out, because it's scary. See, being a Christian isn't just about ethics. It isn't just about morals. Those things are part of it, to be sure. But it isn't just about what can I gut out on my own will. It's about living with the power of the Holy Spirit to do what Jesus did. He says, you're going to go do more than I did. And we tend to, because we're human and inherently a bit selfish, tend to say, thanks for the Holy Spirit, how can that be great for me? But that wasn't the point. The point was go. He says, go and make disciples in Jerusalem. That's where he was speaking, Jerusalem, so locally. Judea and Samaria, so regionally, just the broader area, and then the ends of the earth. So Jesus, upon resurrecting, he spent his life mostly around Jerusalem, but then he says, now it's on. Now we're going to go global. Now it's the whole world. And so last week, or a few weeks ago, we did another Go Sunday, and we did a report. We had Teen Challenge come in, and so Teen Challenge is a wonderful ministry that is here to help people with drug and alcohol addiction, and we love them. We love what they do. They're part of our Jerusalem. They're part of our local. So we had them, and we heard a great testimony. Cassidy crushed it, was awesome, and we heard a little bit more about what Teen Challenge is doing, and then we heard from our Utah team. We talked about our Judea and Samaria, what's happening, what we are doing in the United States. And today we're focusing on the ends of the earth. If we aren't going, we're sending. Romans 10 says this, how then will they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how are they to believe in him of whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? And how are they to preach unless they are sent? As it is written, how beautiful are the feet of those who preach the good news. So maybe you're not called to go and preach at the ends of the earth, but you're called to be involved in sending. And you do live somewhere, right? So you have a Jerusalem. So you're called to live it out here. But you're not just called, you're equipped. You're given the Holy Spirit to live it out. Yesterday, as Michelle said, we did our first 30 for Freedom. I've talked about this before. 30 for Freedom is a grassroots effort to raise money and awareness to end human trafficking in our lifetime. It's a bold goal. We shared a video, I think, in the past week about a woman named Hannah whose sister was stolen, really tricked, and then stolen and then sold into slavery for $30. Over 8 years, she serviced 20,000 men, which works out to $2,500 a year, or 7 times a day. And they're part of the body people of Nepal who are Dalit or untouchable, which means they don't really matter. And one thing you could say, well, where's the justice in that? In those cultures that have those castes, that is justice. If you're an untouchable, it's because you deserve to be. So whatever you get is your just return for whatever you did in your last life. And if you handle that well, then you'll have a better life next time. So no one comes in to rescue, because why would you? You wouldn't spend your resources doing that. And these people are left with impossible situations. One thing I learned recently, I didn't realize this, is during the pandemic, you'd have families who are starving. They have no money for medicine, no money for food. And maybe they have multiple children, 4 or 5 kids. You can picture that, right? And you can't feed your kids. Now, most of us from time to time have had more or less money. But probably few of us have ever been in a situation where we just couldn't eat. And so these people come in and say, well, I'll give you some money now so you can feed your family. And then when the pandemic's over, I get to come and take one of your girls. So I'm going to put a deposit down, and then I own her. I'm going to take her in to slavery. And so you're left with the impossible choice. So I let my whole family starve at the cost of one? Or do I, at the cost of one, feed them? I dare say no one here has been in a situation or known someone, unless you've traveled to some of these far countries, where you've had to make that kind of choice. They're parents just like we are. They love their kids just like you do. They're kids just like the kids you know, with the same hopes and dreams and silliness and all the things that we love about kids. These are impossible situations. 30 for Freedom is trying to do what it can to end that. And there's lots of organizations doing that. We love 30 for Freedom because, well, we know the people who run it, and so we trust them, and you can't beat the deal. 100% of what you give goes to the cause. There's about 2 million children in the global commercial sex trade. About 45 million people in slavery today, maybe more than ever before. And it's a $150 billion industry. Why does it end? It doesn't end because justice is different and there's too much money on the line. That's why it doesn't end. Because money is power. It's a global problem, to be sure, but it's centered around the poorest. And the poor are the most vulnerable. Venture is the parent organization over 30 for Freedom. And their staff is supported by board members so that everything they raise after that goes to the cause. And they focus on reaching projects where people have 2% or 2% or less have access to the gospel, which is kind of hard to get your head around. What that means is, like, if you're here on the cross, and you might say there's a lot of people that aren't believers, and that's true. A lot of people don't know Jesus, and that's true. But it's hard to go for a walk and not pass a church. Friends of ours were missionaries to China, and one time, and they stand out because they're all redhead, and they got a bunch of kids, and there aren't a lot of big families in China, and no one's a redhead, so they're in this city where there are only Americans there, and my friend took his son shoe shopping, and the woman says, they homeschool, so they were free during the day, and the woman's like, why is he out of school? Why is he? Well, we're here, and we just kind of explaining what they do a little bit, and he mentioned that they teach the Bible. And this woman thought, he's speaking in Mandarin, and she thought he had misspoken a Mandarin word because she'd never heard the word Bible before. Most of us don't know someone who hasn't heard the word Bible. Where Venture is focused, about 98% of the people haven't heard the word Bible. Hard to fathom, right? So their aid goes to where people have 2% or 2% have access to the gospel, and 1% or less of Christian aid goes. Most Christian aid goes to countries where it's easier to get. These are very difficult countries. So most aid goes to countries where it's easier to get in there, and that makes sense. It's safer, it's easier to access. Venture and 30 for Freedom sends their aid. Really, if you kind of draw a big circle around Nepal, which means countries like Bangladesh, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, countries where it's very hard to be, India, That's where their aid goes. And that's one reason why I love this organization. They're going to some of the hardest places. As Michelle said yesterday, we had a great first 30 for Freedom event, and thank you so much. If you were there, the real heroes, the joke was the real heroes, but if you participated in the event, you benefited from the work of Aaron and Michelle. Thank you so much for doing a great job hosting. Many of you walked and supported and shared the link of what we're doing so people could give. So thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. We had a couple people run. Christine ran 3. We had Kyle ran 6. We had some friends in the Twin Cities that kind of ran as part of our virtual team. And then a friend of mine and I, about, 8 months ago, my friend David fell in with a bad crowd. He fell in with me, and I knew he ran. I said, well, hey, I'm thinking about doing this 30 for Freedom. I think you should do it. And then he's like, well, I could do something, but not 30. And then I kind of just said, no, you're doing 30. I think it's really how it went. And then he's got a strong case of FOMO, so David couldn't miss out on it. So David and I ran 30 miles yesterday for the cause for 30 for Freedom. So give it up for David. If you're unsure, running 30 miles at once is hard. It's a long way to run, but we did it. And the fruit of all of that labor, beyond awareness and a great community event for us, was our goal was to raise $1,000. And by the time it's done, we anticipate being to $2,500. So wonderful job. Thank you so much for that. The bigger organization of 30 for Freedom has raised over $300,000 so far this year, and over $1 million total since it began 6 years ago. So it's just a wonderful effort. 100% of that goes to help girls, mostly girls, get out of human trafficking, to get education. Education is free for us. It's not in much of the world, and it makes a huge difference for the status, especially for girls and women around the world. It changes everything for them. So they provide education, discipleship, and it changes whole villages, changes lives, changes communities, and it's a wonderful thing. So thank you so much for being a part of our event, for giving, for walking, for snow cones, right? So it was just a great day for Bluffs. Well, as soon as you're ready, I'm going to have you come up and take your time. I'm going to have Elise come up and talk about missions. Missions is sometimes very intimidating for people because it feels like it's something that really holy people do. Our saints go do that. Sometimes it feels like the only way to do missions is to go plant churches, and you think, well, I'm not a preacher, I can't do that. We know a lot of missionaries. They aren't the saints, they aren't holy. They're just people like you and I that feel called and are willing to obey that call, and they go and do some really neat things around the world. And so we do support as a church 2 missionary couples or families. One is the first Assemblies of God missionaries in Libya, which is a pretty bold place to be, pretty scary place to be. So we've known them for a long time. Thank you. And others, another family that we support as a church. At least you can come up. You can bring that too, whatever you need. Is a family that works in Bangladesh. So they work with people kind of like I talked about, very similar to the Dalits, very poor, mostly with girls, trying to give them an opportunity, provide them job skills and education. But I wanted to have Elise come up. So Elise Olson just had twin girls. Let's give it up for that, yeah? Have a seat. And who was that you had with you?
Zealand, and I thought she would be sleeping the whole time.
That's all right. Zealand's great.
Unpredictable.
She can do what she wants. So tell us about your missions experiences.
Yeah, I didn't grow up in a Christian home, so it kind of started a little bit later for me. I actually didn't even know Joseph and God were different because I thought they were both Jesus's father until I was like 13. So I didn't grow up like in the church at all. And then near the end of high school, I was a part of a church. Friends had brought me. And one of the members was from Israel, and there had just been a bombing that directly affected people he knew. And I felt nothing. And I felt kind of bad that I felt nothing, but I didn't know what to do about the apathy. And then somebody else actually stood up at that church and said, if you don't care, pray that you do. I was like, okay, well, I can do that.
Sure.
And it wasn't long after that I started learning about the whole continent of Africa, and a lot of just longing and passion just started to develop in my heart. So that's kind of where it started.
Sure.
And then some of the missions trips I went on were if trips to Africa didn't come to fruition, if I had been planning to go and it didn't work out. So a lot of my story with Africa is a lot of waiting and hoping, and then kind of doing something different in the meantime. So I'd been to a couple different countries, some for missions trips, some just for travel, and then I had taught, the longest I had been overseas was teaching English in Korea. So yeah, that was kind of my experience overall.
So we're going to talk about Zimbabwe a little bit. How did you end up in Zimbabwe?
Yeah, in college, I guess this is part of the first question, but in college, I had a professor that said, hey, I know some people going to South Africa. And I said, great, how do you know that I like Africa? And he said, because I listened to you. And during the waiting to go, every chance I could, I just would research things about the whole continent and different war zones, and I would spend time just looking up refugee camps and finding out where they were all from and how many were in each camp, and I was just fascinated. And so a lot of my papers that he had read were about Africa. So I went with this team of people that I didn't know, and I ended up in South Africa for about a month. So that kind of started, and it was just the check, like, God, is this me making this up, or is this you wanting me to be in Africa somewhere? And then I came back, and I still felt like I wanted to go again. And a few years later, again, the whole waiting, a few years later, I ended up with an organization called Mennonite Central Committee. And so they send young adults overseas, but they do it in a way that it's like a job, so your experience has to meet what the community needs, and I really respected that. It wasn't what do I want to do and where do I get to go and what do I want out of this. It was very much like it has to be mutually beneficial. And so, yeah, I ended up there. I said I would only go for a few months, and it ended up being a year program, and I liked the program so much that I committed to it. So I was there for about a year.
Okay, wow. And what kinds of things were you doing there?
Yeah, my title was called the Community Support Worker, which is very vague. It's also even more vague if you're in Africa.
Which, to be honest, is how a lot of missions trips go. Like you
Yeah.
kind of go, and you're as a Westerner, you're thinking, tell me what I want to do. I want to be respectful, and then they're like, yeah, it's going to work out. And you just kind of have to merge in with that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what happened. So I was pretty immersed. I lived with host families, and by the end, the other American who was with me had already left, so I was the only one there. And yeah, I mean, they do speak English in this city, but Ndebele is the main language, a dialect of Zulu that they also speak quite a bit. But I worked with a local organization there who just worked with the poorest of the poor. So living in the city, I mean, I stayed in a house, I had a toilet, I had a shower, but then you go out in just a little ways, and a lot of people who lived in the city didn't even know about the community that we were working in, but it was in a squatter camp. So no access to clean water. They would have to break, I think 300 families were living there at the time. Wow. They would have to break a water pipe to get water for their families, and then the government would come and repair it, and then they'd break it and repair it and break it and repair it. And that was their water source. And then food was just relying on donations at that point, or their neighbor getting donations, and then everyone would share it. And shelter was like, tin shacks and just, again, whatever they could find. So we worked in that community, and I ended up working some with the kids there, mainly because the organization had a school for kids who couldn't afford the government school. So if the kids were there during the day, they weren't going to school, and I could put them on my list and start to get to know who was in the situation where they would most likely never get to go to school if we didn't give them the opportunity to do so. And another organization was funding their schooling. And so I was the one who was collecting all the information on the kids, and then I got to enroll the next dozen in school. So they were the second group to be enrolled in the school. So that was kind of my primary focus.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So talk about maybe what was the most challenging thing about, you mentioned eventually being the only American, and that can be, I think that's a situation where you don't want it to be a big deal, but kind of it is.
Yeah.
There's someone that gets you, but maybe it's that, maybe something else. What was the most challenging experience or part of that experience?
Yeah, I would say it was that I kind of loved being the only American. I mean, there were other visitors that would come, and
Sure.
the director was actually from Australia, but he had a Zimbabwe family, had lived there for a while.
Okay.
So, I mean, there were foreigners in and out, but in terms of, the daily life, it was me, and I loved that. I felt like I identified really well living like that, but it also was really lonely. So even though I was with people all the time, there was still just this, I didn't always understand what was going on, or, there was just differences. So I was around people, but there was this loneliness.
So you were there a year, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean you missed holidays and birthdays and all that?
I
or
did, yeah.
You didn't go home at all?
No.
And didn't have any family visitors during that
Right.
time?
Yeah.
It's a long time.
Yeah.
All of a sudden those things become really important, don't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. What was the most eye-opening, cultural difference or just experience in general? What thing that when you think back about that year, what's one of the first big memories that comes to mind, or
Yeah.
changes maybe? What really jumps out at you?
There's so many. I mean, I feel like I feel like I learned a new sort of love. Mm-hmm. There were just people that God just really there's no other explanation than he had me specifically love those people. And so just the way that I was I would meet them, or the way that I would feel when I met, just different things where I just knew it was God. There's no way I conjured this up. So that was kind of a shock. I didn't expect that. So that was something, and I mean, there's so many experiences. Some are really fun and some are really sad, and I don't know which ones to share. But James kind of reminded me when I asked him, like, hey, what have I talked about the most?
Sure.
Something that came up was this man named Christopher. So he was Zimbabwean. He's a white Zimbabwean. And so there's a lot of racial tension there. Sure. So the white people are the minority and the ones that are kind of looked down upon. That's okay. We'll just skip that for now because that's a whole. There's more there.
Is there more to say about that?
Okay. So he's a white Zimbabwean. I would pass him most mornings on my walk to work. He would be passed out on the stairs or on the cement or just in the most bizarre positions. He always had booze in his pocket and hot chili peppers in the other pocket. He just had this raggedy hair, and he was just kind of like beautiful in this like natural way. I just noticed him every morning. And so we would greet each other, and I'd go to work. He would show up to the soup kitchens that the organization put on, and one day the team was praying over before lunch for all the people that were there, and I kind of kept my eyes open, and I just noticed him. Like, it was just this, again, just God, right? I noticed him, and I didn't want to take my eyes off him. I was just like honed in on him, and I just felt God saying like his name's Mordecai, like in the Bible, right? Like this man who becomes royalty, like treated like that, and it was like dress him in like purple royal robes, like he's royalty. And it just he's the city drunk, and God's telling me like, no, he's royal, like he will be royalty,
Wow.
So it's easy to see people's brokenness or their sin, but in reality, like what God really sees is, the last will be first, and
Sure.
yeah.
Well, so that would be I can see why that would stick out for you for a while. Now, I think one thing that's, especially if you haven't traveled a lot out of this region or out of this country, it's hard to picture. It's like, they say, fish can't describe water. It's hard to picture or describe, what parts of your thinking are American and or not. And we often think that the way we think is the way everyone thinks. Our values are everyone's values, right? It's just kind of the way it is. And then you travel, and at first you kind of gravitate to things that are similar or look similar, and then gradually you begin to realize, okay, the culture is very different. What are some of the kind of lasting cultural differences? So you were pretty immersed, Zimbabwean family, so I would imagine your thinking began to change over time. What are some things about Zimbabwean culture that you maybe brought with you that you thought, I actually like this better than what's normal for me as an American, or what are those things that really, I guess, that lasted for you, or maybe just we're very different. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. It's been a long time since I've been there, but there's still these changes that I think are just maybe embedded, some that I don't even realize. It took me a long time to go to a grocery store that was big. I still like my little small grocery stores because it's just like oh my goodness, we have 35 options of tortilla chips.
Right.
Like, that doesn't seem fair. So
Right.
there was a lot of that when I came
Right.
home. And a lot of like I didn't, just bizarre things, right? I didn't want to use my dryer. It was just one of those things where I was like, it feels wrong to use my dryer. I need to go hang up my clothes. So just things that like I needed to do to adjust back, to slow things down. There was something beautiful about like hand washing my clothes and hanging them up, and the electricity, it was on a shared grid, so it's called power sharing. So
Okay.
all of a sudden your electricity would go out for 8 hours, and then you'd have it the next day, and then you wouldn't, and then
Right.
and so it just slowed things down. It wasn't so
Yeah.
so rushed, and yeah.
Yeah, people I know that have lived overseas for a significant amount of time beyond a shorter mission trip will talk about that grocery store just being overwhelmed. It's like how much peanut butter, how many choices of peanut. They're used to like being glad to find one government issue peanut butter on the shelf. That's good enough. That's all we have. And then coming here, they can't choose, and it's just it's for me that I kept hearing that, and it kind of gradually had to accept like, okay, this is something my friends are experiencing. But it's that kind of stuff is quite shocking, and definitely the pace. Most of those folks talk about the pace. We're pretty busy here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you've stayed involved and connected to Zimbabwe. Talk about what you're doing now.
Yeah, so when I got back, I started a nonprofit, and I got it. It's registered now, so it's a registered nonprofit, and it works with the communities there that I worked in. So that squatter camp community, and then there's another one also that we're mostly in. And I work with partner organizations that are on the ground, so I don't have to be there right now, but I do know them all firsthand. So I know the route that the money goes, and I know exactly what's happening. I know the people that they're helping, and so it's nice to have like certainty. And then also, I don't have to be there if I can't be, which right now I can't be, or I'm choosing not to be, I should say. So it's a registered nonprofit. It works with education and health, so that's nutrition and mental health. So there's a social worker that we help support that works in the school, and that's new. A boy actually committed suicide 2 years ago, and because of that, the school hired a social worker to be more proactive instead of reactive, and it's been amazing. Just because the kids are kind of in constant trauma and there's no place to heal, there's no safe zone, but she's creating that there for them at the school. So that's a huge blessing, and we want to support that. And then for nutrition, we work with an egg business. So we have 200 chickens in Zimbabwe, and we're able to give away about 600 to 700 eggs a week. And it's to people that wouldn't be able to buy from any other local shop or any other local seller. They just wouldn't be eating like a protein source. So we kind of hold the tension of relief and sustainability. I don't want to take business away from somebody who's on the ground, but if they're not able to buy that anyways and they're starving, then we will really, as much as we can, provide relief. And so sometimes that tension's really hard to hold, because COVID aside, obviously right now that's even harder to hold. It's a lot more relief. But there's also, seasons of drought and seasons where people are starving, and in the name of sustainability, we decided as an organization not to say no. So thankfully, we're able to do both, and
Nice.
Yeah, it's not as clean as I think a lot of donors would like it to be, because sustainability is obviously the ideal, but sometimes we decided, relief is necessary too. And so education, when COVID started, we were a week shy of sending 2 people over there to document the changes that have occurred and start our educational sponsorship program. So we had a bunch of kids lined up to get all their information, and then we were going to start a sponsorship program where it was direct, one-to-one, families here supporting kids there. So that's a little bit on hold in terms of the formalities of it, but we are still supporting kids there and have some sponsorships growing.
So what's your organization called?
It's called Roots for Zimbabwe.
And how do you kind of raise funds and then kind of help decide how it's going to be spent a little bit and partner with people over there. And I love that. One of the things that we're slowly learning as Westerners is often, maybe with good intentions, we've done missions kind of badly. And so they'll talk about, American missionaries kind of come in and it's like, we're a big elephant at a mouse party. We're just stepping on stuff, and we feel pretty good. We're making a lot of noise, but we leave, and it's just a mess. It hasn't really helped. And so we're learning to develop and partner with local leadership better, I think, over time. And that has its own challenges, but hopefully is more sustainable and can kind of grow on its own. But so you partner with them, you raise funds. What do you do to raise funds?
Yeah, I mean, right now it's just word of mouth, to be honest.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's just mainly word of mouth.
Okay. And you have some cards back here by the offering box, I think?
Yes.
So if people are interested in knowing more, you can grab a card, maybe talk with Elise after service. One thing that we do as Bluffs, we order a lot of supplies, and we order a lot from Amazon. Well, if you go to smile.amazon.com, there's a bunch of different registered nonprofits that they will give a portion of your purchase to. And I didn't look it up, but I think this calendar year alone, we're over $100 just by the stuff we would normally buy. So no donations, just the stuff we would normally buy. Jeff Bezos, obviously a generous and selfless, person. He gives. Amazon gives a portion of that purchase to whatever organization you dedicate it to. So I encourage you, if that's something you do, if you use Amazon, make purchases, it's just the same login, I believe, but it's smile.amazon.com. It has all your orders, all your history, all your card information. It just gives a portion to Roots or whatever group that you're interested in supporting. So.
Yeah, and it really does help. I mean, I'll just get checks in the mail or deposited in my account, and $5 is 30 eggs. So, I mean, that's 30 meals for people. So it's a big deal.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's hard for us to understand what it's like to not have protein, but it's a huge issue, and it makes a huge difference. It's maybe not important, but if you look at the performance of African athletes versus much of the world, that's slowly climbing for some countries as nutrition has gotten better. So the difference is not anything other than they have lack of protein compared to our access to protein. That's the biggest difference. It's not inherent ability or smarts or anything like that. We just were born here, they were born there, and protein can make a difference, a huge difference, obviously, in how someone develops, and sports aside, other parts of the development. So it's hard to get our heads around that kind of need, but it's very real in a lot of the world.
Yeah, and we just kind of felt we couldn't support education without supporting nutrition, because a lot of the kids are walking far to school, so they need it, but then also just brain development for learning. If there's not nutrition, they're not going to be learning. And so we felt like they kind of went hand in hand. Right,
and then the country can't change, and so forth.
Right.
So, all right, well, anything else you want to share?
A lot, but Noah, I'm good.
You're good? All right, give it up for Elise. Thank you so much. And I am super jealous of Letitia. If you don't know me, I love babies, and I know that even if I tried, you wouldn't give her up. So we're going to try to let it go, but it's very distracting for me right now. Well, thank you so much, Elise, for being here and for doing what you do. I'm going to ask Galen to come up. So, Galen, if you would join us. Give it up for Galen. So, if you don't know or haven't heard, we are here in La Crosse, mostly because first Linda and then Galen, right? Because you listened well.
All right, yeah.
And you can have a seat. And that was kind of the connection. And so we have kind of multiple bosses, so to speak. Galen is one of them, and so
the most important one.
Most important, and if you're glad we're here, then you can think good thoughts. If you're not glad, it's weird that you're here, but you can take it out. Some people at our home church in Minneapolis have mixed feelings. There were some that you didn't want to meet. You're a little bit scared of.
Hey, I love Jake and Michelle. They're rock stars in our eyes, and delighted that you have planted this expression of God's church in La Crosse. I think that this is amazing, and everything about this service I've so enjoyed. I want to have a longer conversation with Elise.
Elise, yeah.
Elise. I think you could have listened to her, and you didn't need to bring me up. This is
right.
She's right. Wonderful. Roots of Zimbabwe.
Yep.
I love it.
Yeah.
Love it. You going to give her some money?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Right. what we were going to give to you, we'll just just kidding. Well, we've done this a little bit. Can you tell us who you are?
Sure.
Your position with the district.
Sure. For 12 years, the last 12 years, I've been serving in the district office for the Assemblies of God here in Wisconsin and Northern Michigan. That is our district. And my official title is Missions Director. I keep telling my wife I'm a very important person, and she doesn't buy it. But under the umbrella of Missions Director is foreign missions. We process new missionaries, and there are a couple of different categories there, missionary associates and career. And then also we have U.S. missions under our umbrella. That would include like Teen Challenge that you mentioned, and we have a number. You know, they say that America now is the third greatest mission field, and so we want to continue to process U.S. missionaries to do specialized ministry here at home. And then I think in my mind's eye, the whole church planting thing at home is one of the most important things we can do. They say that is the greatest means for evangelism, because not only do you affect a community, but you raise up missionaries to send abroad. And then we've added a new initiative under our umbrella, and that is ethnic ministries. And are you aware of that?
Yes.
Okay. So ethnic, we've been told that in the next, within the next 10 years or less, our movement, the church at large in America, will be less than 50% white. And so we need to be very much aware of our ethnic brothers and sisters. We have 5 main ethnic groups. There are others, but we work with the Hmong, we work with the Native Americans, with the black community, with Hispanic, and Asian Indians. Right. Those 5, yeah.
And this is obviously a very important and a little bit volatile time, right? We need to do this better than we have in the past, and so it's been great.
We do.
And I think we need to move past. We need to move past an us and them, and do things together. And so, but it's challenging work because a lot of damage has been done.
That's right.
So
that's right. You know, they say, I don't mean to butt in, but I'm just going to share, you know, what comes to mind. But Native Americans, for instance, you know, we've been trying to reach the Native Americans for Jesus since the Pilgrims came over. Right. And they tell us that 3% of Native Americans are Christ followers. So we've not done a very good job there. Yeah.
Right. So there's work to be done, and a lot of humility, I think, needed in that work. The next question, what is that? Why on earth did Linda marry you? Why is that in there?
I'll tell you what, I did marry up. I know,
yes.
You know.
Yes. Well done.
Yeah.
Let's move on from that.
Yeah, okay.
So you talked a little bit about what you do for the district, but I know from knowing you, obviously what you shared this morning and what we've talked about in the past, you have a real heart for missions. You care a lot about it. You think a lot about it. A lot of what, kind of as you said, a lot of what, one of the motivations for helping church plants is that churches help send missionaries, so it's a kind of a full circle thing. Why? Where did that get started?
Well, you know, I care for missions because Jesus cared about missions. He said prior to his ascension, he said in Acts 1:8, and you'll receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you'll be my witnesses. Right. You know, that power is to give you boldness to witness and to share faith with, Jerusalem. This is your Jerusalem, and then Judea, into all Judea, Samaria, to the ends of the earth. What we've done in Wisconsin, Northern Michigan, I don't know, I need to be careful because Michelle's dad is here, Dr. Young, you know, and he's a theologian, but we became very creative. We put Jerusalem, you know, under the city that you're pastoring. Sure. Then we put Judea under church planting. You know, Jesus was very creative, and so we decided, you know, we can do this too. Sure. And then Samaria would include, like Teen Challenge. In our state, we have City on a Hill. We have, I love what you're doing for traffic girls. Mm-hmm. and that would be Samaria, and then to the ends of the earth. We've processed a number of foreign missionaries in the last 12 years. I think we're upwards of 40. Wow. And I appreciate the fact that since we're online, you didn't mention names right. to Libya and Bangladesh, because we have a number of very sensitive countries that we are sending missionaries. We call them workers now. Right. And can I tell a quick story?
I think you're going to. Anyway,
okay. So we processed a good friend of mine who served on our missions board in the district here. Felt called to go to Myanmar, and went for 3 years, and there was very instrumental in starting 70 churches. Wow. And they're all healthy. Right. Because he hears back from the national church there. Right. They're healthy. I mean, these churches are like micro churches, a lot of them, but they're out in the sticks, and they are for the first time reaching Buddhists. Wow. You know, we've done a fairly good job. Well, I don't know if we've done a good job, but we are reaching Muslims like crazy, and I think it's because we've given strong emphasis to prayer for the last several years, yeah. And now a lot of Muslims are seeing dreams of Jesus. Right. They're coming to faith. We need to do the same thing, ramp it up with our Buddhists. But anyway, my friend came home with pancreatic cancer. He came back, came home with a right. death warrant on him, and God healed him. But he's not going back to Myanmar. Okay. But isn't it because the doors now have closed? Isn't that amazing, folks? You know, he started instrumental in starting 70 churches, reaching Buddhists, and then he came home with pancreatic cancer. The doors now are closed in Myanmar, right. And so we left there 70 healthy churches. Wow. And so we have a number of great missionaries working around the world, right. Many countries.
Well, in our fellowship, the Assemblies of God has a long history and commitment to missions. You mentioned 40 from Wisconsin. I think that's incredible, and you're instrumental in kind of raising them up and getting them sent out and helping them connect with us. So some of the people we bring in to speak, and we have some missionaries to China.
I'd like to give God a little of that glory, though.
Good.
Yeah. Because these people come and they say, you know, we feel called. Right. We feel called. And so we take them through an interview process. They start in our district, and then we send them to Springfield, which is our Mecca, right. And they continue the process, and right. then they go. Yeah.
So we have a family that's committed to China that's going to be here this fall. And last fall, if you were around, we had a Wisconsin missionary couple that they work in Ukraine. So we really try to be supportive of what's happening, what our missionaries are doing, because we love what's going on.
That's why we started this church.
We're fine with that. So talk about, you know, missions, as I mentioned earlier, can be intimidating. It can be scary. We you know, some of us are thinking, okay, that's really cool. Someone went to Myanmar. Good for him. You know, peace kind of thing. That's terrifying. And it can also just be hard to, I remember I didn't go on my first missions trip until I was, you know, late 30s probably. And I just, for the longest time, especially when I was young, I was just intimidated by the process. How do you pay for it? How do you do it? So can you kind of give us some examples of ways that we could maybe entertain the idea of being involved in missions now? Missions trips or whatever.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, let me take a couple of different paths sure. there, okay? In the Assemblies of God, there's an amazing, probably my favorite opportunity, and it's basically for Chi Alpha kids. Okay. You don't have a Chi Alpha chapter here, but you're
so Chi Alpha is kind of like Crew.
Yeah, it's like Crew. So every other year they do this World Mission Summit. It is probably the most favorite thing I've ever attended. It is absolutely amazing. Sure. Where thousands and thousands of university kids gather together, usually down south around Dallas area. But their theme is give a year and pray about a lifetime.
Sure.
That's been huge with us. And so my office has been bombarded by these kids who want to go on a missions year.
Sure.
And so we help process them. Now that's one way. I forgot your question.
What are some other ways?
Okay, so just in the last week, I had a couple call me, and they're a pastor, but we don't see a lot of pastors anymore coming called into missions. We see a lot of lay people,
right.
And they're wonderful opportunities because we have this strategy of building teams now.
Sure.
One of my favorite missionaries resides in it's one of the Stan countries. Okay, and so they are building a team, and they're inviting people with, you could, if your specialty is teaching or whatever, go and spend a couple of years and just get acquainted with the neighborhood where you are, and that's how we're doing it. But anyway, this pastor came and said, we're just kind of feeling that maybe God is speaking to us about missions. The pastor's wife said, I felt a call to missions years ago. And so we start with just meeting me. Okay, I'll go to their home or whatever, and then we invite them. I've got a missions board that I work with that represents one for every section in our district, and we do either a Zoom or we bring them together. Right. And then if we just feel like this feels good, we sense God in this thing, then we give them the approval to continue the process, and they go to Springfield, right, to get ready to serve in missions.
Right. So you mentioned lay people going, and so people that aren't in a vocational or full-time ministry position but feeling called to go. One of the things that has changed in how we've done missions over the past 20 or 30 years is called business as missions. And it's maybe overlaps a little bit with what you were doing in Zimbabwe at least, but people will go and maybe do what they do here, but do it in another country. I mentioned the friends of ours that we support that are in Bangladesh. They have some friends that are there as well in Dhaka. And Dhaka, I've been there. It's a very difficult city to be in. It's not really pretty. There's no, you go to parts of India, there's temples, there's amazing sights to see, the Taj Mahal, all that. Dhaka doesn't really offer that. What they did is they started opening coffee shops, and their goal was to create a small chain of coffee shops that would just hire the best that they could hire. So it's a Muslim country, so you have almost entirely Muslim staff, and then now these people have good jobs, which are sought after. They get to develop and disciple these people, and but now they're also self-funded as missionaries in Dhaka. So their income is supported by, it's just a business. And the country has no reason to kick them out because they're just business owners. So lots of people are doing that kind of thing. CrossFit is, or other kinds of gyms are happening all over the world in countries you wouldn't guess. That people are opening CrossFit gyms. I have some friends in another closed country that he and his wife were there, and they kind of were trying to figure out what they wanted to do, and they're opening a photo studio. So they're not really photographers, but they're going to figure it out. Some other people I know opened an art studio, and they aren't necessarily artists or photographers or into CrossFit, but they're going to get started as a way to get people together. And if you've ever worked out a lot and maybe had a trainer, those relationships can be pretty close. If you've got an injury or trying to figure something out or lose a lot of weight, whatever, you can have a good relationship with that trainer, and eventually, as the trust grows, they get to share Jesus. And so it's a long-term plan, or nurses or another friend of a friend. He runs a tech business in a closed country, but he's just a tech guy, a computer guy, and so he's there in that country doing the thing that he would do here, but now he's in a closed country. He has neighbors, he has friends, their kids meet people, they have families over, and gradually they get to plant micro churches, house churches we call them here, and people get to meet Jesus. It's a slower process than we typically like here, but it can have really long-lasting effects.
It is a strong discipleship
right.
Thing. You said it a whole lot better than I did.
Thank you.
But so I was in Morocco a few years
Okay.
ago on a missions trip, and I'm invited to preach around the country a little bit in different international churches. But we went to the Mediterranean,
Sure.
and we were just kind of playing in the sand and everything because we had those those play days.
Right.
And so this kid who owned a surfboard shop. He was introduced to us, and he was the typical. I mean, he had long head drags and all of this stuff. He looked like whatever. And the missionary says, "You can't say this out loud, but he's one of our missionaries."
Wow.
Yeah.
So-
And we just sent a young couple to India to help in a CrossFit
Right.
program. Wonderful ideas. Strategic, creative. We love it.
I've mentioned that I've been to India. On one occasion or another, I mentioned that I like soccer. You may have heard that. I have a friend who does missions in India, and he had a growing business career. He was doing great, really unfulfilled, had also been a very good soccer player, and one day is feeling called to missions, and says, I'm good at business, I'm good at soccer, maybe I'll do that. And moved in, has now moving to his third city where he's planning a soccer club, developing Indian leadership, Christian Indian leadership, turning it over to them, and then he's moving to the next city where he's going to keep doing it. And again, it's doing what he did here somewhere else. And that, I think, is something that opens up the door for all of us, whether we do it for a couple weeks and partner with them for a year or for a lifetime. God can use you, what you do, what you love to do, or maybe even what you're curious about. He can use that to open up doors that maybe the local pastor doesn't get open because it's intimidating. You're just going to be someone in the community that Jesus gets to use.
Can I piggyback off of that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so long story, very short. So when I first started this job, I had 7 missionaries come home off the field.
Okay.
3 resigned, and they had good excuses, but they had raised their support. They tell us that, for a career missionary, it can cost upwards of $250,000 just to get them on the field. We do it right. But then, so 3 came home, 2 retired, and 1 died. And so I was.
Was that one of the excuses you accepted or no?
I was a little bit disturbed. I was a little disturbed by the 3 that came home who resigned because of the investment, and so decided that I wanted to, with very little flexibility, only send for first term, which is a 2-year MAs, which are missionary associates. And I don't even necessarily ask about their call so much as they invest 2 years with a career missionary serving. And then they come home 2 years later and they say, we feel called to go back. And so then they apply for career missions, or they come back and they say, we had a great time, we invested in the kingdom, but now we're here to serve.
Right.
And so if you had individuals in the church here who just feel kind of a tug to serve in missions, that's where they would start as an MA. And they would go for those 2 years and experience amazing things as a result. But they would serve under a career missionary.
Right. So it wouldn't just drop you off.
Yeah.
Right.
They
Okay.
don't just drop you off.
Okay. Well, anything else that you want to share before you?
So much,
outta
but I
here?
better not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, also, along with Elise, Galen will be around after service to talk more about missions or church planning or whatever if you're interested. You will get very long answers, so just be prepared for that. But Galen loves missions, loves you guys, loves Bluffs, and we have a lot of opportunities to just go and be used overseas. So thank you so much for Galen. Thank you. Well, we're almost done. God's heart is global. He came for the world, that the world might know him. And then he came and gave his power, his authority to us that we could go and follow that call. His heart is global, and he wants our heart to be global as well. So maybe you felt something stirring in your heart. And there's certainly something that can just be exciting and that can feel passing. But maybe it's the Holy Spirit saying, I think this might be for you. You could say, I can't go do that right now. I've talked to people, you've talked to people that this, you talked about waiting. Sometimes this vision, this idea begins to stir, and it's not yet, but it still begins to grow. We can still nurture that now. Maybe it's something that you think, okay, when I graduate school, I'll give a year, or I'll go on a long trip. Maybe someday, but you don't want to let it go. So that's okay. It doesn't have to be now. You're not making a decision now to go. You're making a decision now to be open to what the Holy Spirit might be saying to you. You have that feeling. Gail and talk to you about that. I certainly could talk more about that. If Lisa's story resonated with you, you think, I don't know if I want to go, but I've got some administrative skills. Ruth, she's got 2 twins, and another one just like this one at home, and so she could use some help. Or you think maybe Zimbabwe isn't where you feel drawn to. You had a heart for Africa for a long time. Maybe you've had a heart for another part of the world, and you want to use your administrative ability to help other people on the ground there. She can give you some ideas how to get started. If you feel that stirring, speak with her about that. If you feel compelled to give to 30 for Freedom, or that campaign is still open, you can do that. Or if you want to just give to the missionaries that we support, you can do that. Just designate it when you put it in the box, and we'll make sure it gets to the right spot. But don't let fear be the answer. We often sing the song, No Longer Slaves. And last week, Letitia talked about how fear is this thing that she struggles with and yet wants to submit that to God. It's okay to be afraid. We're going to feel afraid, but we don't let fear be the boss. I'm afraid to do that, so I'm not going to do it. We say, I'm afraid to do that. God, what are you saying? I'm going to walk with you through that fear. I'm not going to be a slave to fear. Fear is not going to determine what I do. I'm going to follow God no matter what. And there are moments, it was scary for us to come here. We were leaving friends and family, and we didn't know anyone here. And so, but we came. We followed God's call here. Things can be scary, but they can be good too. Sometimes things are scary and they're bad. And sometimes it's hard to know the difference for sure. But don't let fear be the answer. Continue to lean in. Continue to ask God, what are you saying? God's heart is global. And if you follow Jesus, then he wants to renew your mind and draw you into participating in going or sending, and maybe a little bit of both. That's part of the deal. When we have communion, when we say, I follow you, Jesus, it isn't I follow you to get all the presents, as I follow you where you go. And where does he go? He goes everywhere he's needed. That's where he goes. And that can be scary. It can make our hearts vulnerable. It can make us vulnerable in lots of ways. But we follow Jesus because he knows, because he calls us to do it. I'm going to pray, and then we're free to go. Lord, I pray for our missionaries, that the Wisconsin missionaries that are out on the field or raising their funds right now, I pray you'd be with them. This is a long haul. They are away from home for a year, 2 years, 4 years, and that can be difficult. I pray you'd encourage them. Lord, I pray you'd give them courage, that you would help them to feel the love and fellowship from people back home, that you would also just continue to be with them. Some of them are having great success, and some are feeling like they're just struggling day to day, and they don't know why they're there. I pray you'd encourage them. You'd give them wisdom as they make decisions, and you'd give them connections with people that they love so much. Please work and protect our missionaries. I pray that you would work in places like Haiti, that is suffering in so many ways and has for so long. It needs your help. It needs your reconstruction, your restoration. Be in Haiti. Be in Myanmar, who is suffering in poverty and military coup. There are so many workers in these places that need your mercy and grace as well. They're exhausted. They're scared. They're being imprisoned, and yet they're trying to serve you. I pray you'd give them courage and keep them safe. Afghanistan is said to be the next human rights disaster. We need your help. And your heart is global, so our hearts go to Afghanistan as well. We follow you there. I pray you'd be in Afghanistan. And those people who are on the ground trying to serve them and make things right, I pray you'd give them courage and strength and wisdom. And Lord, again, I pray you'd help us to be open to how you want to use us, to where you're calling us. Help us to hear that and to obey and to take the next step, Lord. We make ourselves available to you. We've sung that today. Make me whatever you want me to be. We've sung it. Help us to live it out, Lord. We love you so much that you would choose to want to use people like us is incredible. Help us not miss out on that opportunity. Thank you so much, Jesus, for the service, for our guests, and for this day. In your holy name, amen. Thank you so much for being here. If you want to speak with Gail and Elise, here. Otherwise, grab a donut and some coffee and talk to someone you don't know. Have a great day.